after lunch. We have four really distinguished speakers this afternoon, and we will be talking about how we can build a regional approach to an advanced ASEAN creative economy. Each one of our panelists this afternoon will be focusing on three areas. They've been asked to respond to the following themes. The first is about coordination across the region and how ASEAN's unique cultural heritage and voice can be made relevant and inspiring for the creative economy across the region. The second area they've been asked to cover is global best practice. So what are the learning points and good practices globally and at national levels that can be used to enhance a coordinated approach to a regional approach towards the development of an ASEAN creative economy? And the third is about engaging communities, bringing to life real-life examples, showcasing exchange through culture, and identifying and celebrating unique cultural heritage and strength of the ASEAN members to help formulate the framework that we will be developing. So I'd first like to ask Karen Shepherd. Karen is Strategic Director for the UCCN in Kuching in Malaysia, to give a short presentation. So you can either do it at the rostrum or at your chair. And we need the clicker as well, actually. Wahida will hopefully come with a clicker. So you can change the slides.
Is there a clicker? Or even slides? One or the other? Both, ideally. Right, so I'm just going to do a little 5-minute. Are you going to do the slides for me?
We need the clicker. I think they have it. Yeah, they'll bring it to you.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to say how grateful we are, and we being Kuching Sarawak, to be represented here, because actually these kind of connections are really important to us. So we are going to talk about this regional framework, and I'm going to start by going super local. So I actually come from Kuching, which is a city in one of the two Borneo states of Malaysia, in Sarawak. And we became Malaysia's first city under the UNESCO Creative Cities Network in 2021, subsequently joined by Ipoh, and hopefully by others in this cycle. We became a city of gastronomy, so thank you very much for your advocacy for food as a creative pursuit. I absolutely agree. But actually, the state of Sarawak, we have, because of our federal system, is now engaged in preparing a creative industry development blueprint. This is specifically for our state, and actually distinguishing itself from the rest of the nation, let alone from the rest of the region. The map, familiar to everyone in ASEAN, gives you a little idea of why. I mean, we are surrounded by water, effectively, separated from the rest of the country. We are the biggest state by landmass in Malaysia. We are actually the same size as West Malaysia, the peninsula, but we only have a population of 2.5 million people. So if we can go on to the next slide. So these are the two kind of questions that I'm looking at a little bit. And I want to talk first about this idea of a local approach and how important that is, before we start to think about how that fits into a regional approach. For us in Sarawak, and I think this will resonate with a lot of ASEAN countries, a very local approach is not just a choice, it's actually an obligation. We have a range of cultures which are completely unique to our state. And some of these cultures are actually, or cultural practices, are limited to a series of villages, a series of communities. So this is kind of the basis of our obligation to preserve these cultures. But it's also a source of a little bit of tension, because cultural practice and creative output, how do we reconcile the two going forward? And also this idea of cultural diversity and us working together as a unified bloc. So this is where I'm coming from. But effectively what I'm going to do is take you through our approach to the UNESCO Creative Cities Network and then think a little bit about this question. Next slide. So we started off, as with all UNESCO Creative Cities Network, we have an action plan very broadly. And this will not be, oh, there we go, thank you. All right. And this will not be that surprising to anybody. So really looking at how we support our creative and cultural sector going forward, and particularly in gastronomy. So some public infrastructure projects, but also a lot of capacity building and projects making connections with other people. And really, in UCCN, we work across these 4 areas. So revitalizing urban space, working and consolidating our stakeholders, creating awareness on our sector, and finally, to go back to this point, actually encouraging creativity based in our own culture. So for UCCN, we have a lot of people working in cultural heritage preservation, but actually we look at how we use our unique cultural perspective to encourage creativity going forward. So in terms of the question at hand, I've sort of divided it into 3 areas, how I think this works for us. Oh, no, wrong way, sorry. So how did we begin this process? Well, actually, I think we started by asserting our individuality, creating narratives for what made our gastronomy completely unique and completely unusual, which starts very much with provenance, this idea of our Borneo biodiversity and the things that we eat that nobody else eats, and actually the cultures that have allowed us to eat them over time. We were having a little chat earlier about durian flowers. So we in Sarawak eat durian flowers. I think we're the only people who do, because we have these strong established foraging routes. Anyway, so you can look on the side. This is kind of the narrative that we developed. And we have, through UCCN, used creativity and culture to assert that. So looking at festivals, looking at publication, workshops, capacity building events, also policy engagement for things like our rice wine production. But you can see actually that this narrative that we have created, the more we delve into it, the more we realize actually how much of it is shared across ASEAN. We talk about our biodiversity and our unique ingredients, but actually most of them are shared around this archipelago. So things like, for everything from Santan to Belacan, these are the things that unite various ASEAN countries. We just use them in slightly different ways. So this is where we start. We have separate cultures, but actually inextricably linked over history. And within that, we have this kind of important culture of adaptation, localization, and experimentation. So part 2, I guess, if you'll excuse the phrase, is to find our tribe. It's a very Borneo phrase. And this is where this membership of UCCN comes in. Obviously, UCCN is a very global network. It's very interesting for a city the size of Kuching, which is very, can be a little bit isolated, even from the rest of Malaysia, to take part in this and actually to have this kind of exchange. And this is what the network really facilitates, very much an idea of exchanging information based on this first idea of our individualities. So we've been able to share knowledge with other cities in the network, to bring people in to Kuching to share their knowledge through conferences. We've sent our chefs to Thailand and Macau, and of course, the UNESCO conference where I in fact met John before, and he very kindly pretended to remember me. So we're now 3 years into our designation, and this is kind of where we are. So going from exchange to collaboration, I suppose, trying to push it on to the next stage. And this is really about forging new connections. So through forums and exchanges like this, also sharing with our visitors through our gastronomic tourism products that we're developing, building public infrastructure to bring communities together, and looking at this Malaysian and Southeast Asian Creative Cities Network. The Sarawak diaspora, this, I think, will also be familiar to a lot of ASEAN countries. I put that in specifically, and there's a picture of me there with two of the most beautiful human beings that I've ever met in my life, both at the same time, Henry Golding and Anthony Porowski, who both came at the same time. Anyway, I just put it in there. It was quite intimidating at the time. They are extremely beautiful, both of them. But yes, actually, this idea of connection and exchange then becomes strengthened. So this was our biggest event that we had last year, and this, I think, exemplifies really what we're talking about. So in our third year of designation, we did our first major international event, and a big thank you to MOTAC for making that possible. And this was the Kuching Creative City Forum. This is quite a familiar format for the Creative Cities Network, a knowledge exchange platform. But we really took the decision that as local as we need to work, we wanted to make connections across ASEAN. So for this forum, we went cross-cluster and ASEAN focused. And it was a 3 days of workshops, of study visits, of culinary. We had a culinary event where chefs had to collaborate actually to create new dishes. And the result of this, one of the main results of this, is that we will now be looking at how to create a series of chefs' residencies across ASEAN. So really this one focusing on how ASEAN can work together across this Creative Cities Network, not just exchange, but actually work together. So this is the conclusion. I hope I haven't taken too long. These are some of the issues that we work with in Kuching and in Sarawak, and some of the issues that our Creative Industry Development Blueprint will be looking at. And I guess my idea generally to answer the question is that while we all have different cultures, we actually quite often share a lot of the same issues. And I think one of the things that is really important about, for me, being from Kuching, from Borneo, and this idea of a framework for the whole of ASEAN is the ability to bring us in the creative economy together with one single voice. Because as we know, we all compete for resources with other sectors. And for a city like Kuching, being part of this network becomes really important. And if I can just say one final thing, because you used the phrase already and I was a little bit afraid to say it, but effectively, we are engaged in changing the world in the creative economy, I believe. And I think if we can't work together as a sector, then who can?
Thank you so much, Karen. That's a really lovely way to end your presentation on a very inspirational note. So I'd now like to invite Jeremiah Reyes, who is the Foreign Trade Service Officer for the Department of Trade and Industry in the Philippines, to say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see familiar faces. My name is Jeremiah Reyes. You can call me Jeremy. My presentation for this afternoon would actually revolve around perspectives on what exactly do we mean by having a regional approach on creative economy. So I recently got back in Manila from a 7-year posting in Jakarta, in Indonesia. So it actually opened my eyes in Indonesia how creative economy works, how creative economy should be taken into account when it comes to national development, its linkage to sustainable development goals, and how exactly trade and investment has a nexus on creative economy. When we talk about creative economy, we always talk about culture. We always talk about creativity. We always talk about arts. Yes, it's part of creative economy, but taking it from a lens of trade and investment, having it from a lens of the economy itself, then you'll realize that when we talk about creative economy, it's not just a matter of expressing ourselves. It's more of actually using our talents, using our creativity to create an impact in the society. So now, my approach on this presentation is more of giving you a glimpse of what we have done in the past and what do we exactly mean by having a regional approach. So this is not more on the Philippine perspective, but more on my experience having dealing with creative economy in the past years. So, so these are some of the past initiatives that we have done when it comes to taking a regional approach when it comes to creative economy. So back in 2023, during the chairship of Indonesia of ASEAN, the Philippines proposed the creation of an ASEAN-wide creative economy body. So we propose to have a working group on creative economy simply because when we talk about creative economy in the context of ASEAN, we deal with the SOMCA people, we deal with SIOM, we deal with so many departments in the ASEAN Secretariat that we fail to realize that we're just talking about the same thing. We are just talking about creative economy, and yet there are so many institutions, there are so many working groups that deals with creative economy. So why not, change the narrative and let's come up with a working group or a body that will singularly deal with creative economy. So a lot of challenges were identified. So I've been going around sectoral bodies presenting this proposal. So we presented it at SIOM, we presented it at the AEM, we presented the proposal in the IP, Intellectual Property Working Group, and so on and so forth. But a lot of challenges came about during those presentations. So some of the challenges includes reporting lines, how bureaucratic ASEAN is, especially those that are dealing with the ASEAN Secretariat. How many lines we are talking. Even in our own government, there are so many bureaucracies that we identified. Next would be not all AMS, not all ASEAN member states have creative economy legislations, or not even a single entity that deals with creative economy. So in the case of the Philippines, for example, I'm from the Trade Department. We deal with creative economy. But of course, I have colleagues from other departments that also deals with creative economy. So even at the national level, there are so many things that are, being challenged in all these engagements. Another would be different ministries. In Indonesia, they have their Ministry of Creative Economy. In other countries also, they have the Creative Economy Agency. But some of the ASEAN member states, they don't have that. Not even legislation to begin with. And then, varying scope. Earlier, Jonathan mentioned about the definition of creative economy. But then again, at the end of the day, that's the ASEAN definition. But when you put that at the national level, even the scope of what creative economy is varies across member states. So that are some of the challenges that we face when we propose a regional approach on creative economy. And then, of course, at the international level, the Philippines is a mainstay of some of the creative economy engagement. So we participated in the World Conference on Creative Economy in Bali twice, in Uzbekistan also last year. And then bilaterally, we forged an MOU with Indonesia on creative economy because we think that, this could be building blocks of, having a creative economy agreement or a treaty within the region that could be used as a best practice with that. But then again, there are so many challenges that we faced in the implementation and in gaining traction from ASEAN member states on how we can further develop this into a regional undertaking. And of course, in the ASEAN Economic Community Blueprint 2045, I think Jonathan also mentioned this, in the EEC Blueprint 2045, ASEAN already realized that creative economy is a stream of competitiveness. So ASEAN, the creative economy has been treated and recognized as a stream of competitiveness. When we say that, when we were discussing this blueprint, our initial thought was actually because we need to look at creative economy from the lens of creative economy being an engine of growth, creative economy being a provider of dollars, of earnings to the country, because that's what creative economy is at the end of the day. We need to establish that sense of having creative economy in the lens of the economic perspective of it. And then the PH Chairship of ASEAN 2026. Since we are we are championing creative economy since the proposal to have a working group on creative economy. We are thinking that perhaps during our chairship next year, we can positively consider uh, putting creative economy as one of our major key economic takeaways next year. But again, it's up to discussions back in Capital. We don't know what's going to happen. We're looking at how Malaysia will shepherd this initiative this year, especially that we have this symposium. But at the end of the day, of course, this is not only for Malaysia or Philippines because this should be a regional approach. Collectively, ASEAN should decide on what the creative economy should mean for us. So my last slide would be, given all of these things, like all these past initiatives, all the discussions that we had since this morning. So from my perspective, a regional approach by ASEAN on creative economy should include the following. Number one should be collaboration. I think we've been using this term more than enough this morning on the things that we need to do. We need to collaborate. We need to engage among ourselves on how to tackle creative economy as a region. Next would be capacity building. Governments to recognize creative economy sectors as part of national development and growth strategies, as well as targeting what are the skills needed, what are the interventions needed when it comes to creative economy. And then earlier, during the last presentation before we had the lunch break, the survey was actually somehow validated all these things that I'm presenting, because in the survey earlier, you mentioned about also skills development. And then the last one that I want to emphasize is market integration. Again, when we talk about creative economy, we're not talking about just arts and culture, but more so on how to translate those into economic benefits for our stakeholders. So my sense is that when it comes to creative economy, market integration should be ideal. We need to provide greater market access for our talents, for our creatives. We need to use our free trade agreements, our economic integration that's happening in ASEAN to be able to leverage those when it comes to development of creative economy. I think I've spoken enough, so I'll end my presentation with this excerpts from our concept note on the creation of ASEAN creative economy that we submitted to ASEAN member states for consideration. So it says here that creativity is the way of the future. As digital technologies, culture, and the creative economy converge, ASEAN member states need to strengthen their collaboration, align their policies and regulations to address constraints such as establishing a regional consensus on the definition and scope of creative economy, close financing gaps, and address the unequal levels of digital readiness. All these are necessary to promote the growth and development of the creative economy and cultural industries, and the wider culture-based creative economy, heightening our ASEAN identity, our rich history, culture, and heritage. And as we always say in the Philippines, the future is creative. Maraming salamat po, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremiah. That's really interesting. And I'm glad that you mentioned the word impact, because that's something that we'll be discussing in the first workshop very shortly. So that's really good segue into that. I'm hoping that our next speaker, Giorgio, who you've already met on the recorded video, is available online. So I'm just looking at our colleagues from MOTAC just to check that he is here, and we'll be able to speak in a sec. Just as a reminder, Giorgio Fazio is Professor of Macroeconomics and Research Director at the Creative Policy and Evidence Center. That's me. Let's hope that he is here. We'll just give him a sec to join. Giorgio, hello, can you hear us? We can't hear you, but we can see you very well. We can hear you now, yes. Welcome. No, that's absolutely fine. So, good morning to you, because we understand it's very early in the UK where you are. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. That's okay. Your presentation went down really well this morning. So we're having a panel discussion on building a regional approach to an advanced ASEAN creative economy. And we'd be very grateful to hear from you for around 5 or 6 minutes with your thoughts on that. So we'll pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I've had already submitted participants to an overload of slides this morning, so I hope it will be welcome that I don't have any slides for my talk, for my 5 minutes of glory in this panel. So I would like to address the question by saying first why I think regional approach matters, and then what I think a regional approach looks like. So why it matters, first of all, I think it matters because we live in an increasingly globalized world, and we live in a world that is increasingly affected by global and technological and geopolitical shocks that that massively increase uncertainty for creative businesses and potentially threaten also cultural diversity. So having a regional approach really matters in order to protect the domestic economies first and foremost, including from trade wars. Now, what does this mean in practice? I think if we look at other unions, essentially means removing internal barriers. And the barriers that need to be removed are in general in terms of goods, services, people, and capital. So if removing barriers in these 4 dimensions and areas enhances really regional market integration. Now, this really means harmonization of regulations and policies, investing in shared infrastructure, and as the previous speakers have mentioned, supporting cross-border creative exchanges. Now, I would say that stronger regulations in terms of IP, for example, and IP enforcement and protection really matters in order to strengthen in a global system the regional Asian economy and making it more internationally competitive, but also in the end allowing the region to preserve its internal cultural diversity. I don't think these two should be seen as a trade-off. IP enforcement, harmonization of the rule, and preservation of cultural diversity. At the same time, as I mentioned in my presentation, when we look at the fast speed of technological developments, especially in artificial intelligence, and the consequences that this can have in terms of challenges and opportunities for the creative economy, a regional approach is also one that allows common adoption of rules and provides certainty for investors and for users in the adoption of such technologies, which is critical in order to become, to be a different tier of technological adoption and development. And as previous speakers said already, I think clearly a regional approach also means collaboration across borders between businesses and policies as well, national industrial strategies. We know from the experience of other countries, like the UK, for example, that clusters really matter when it comes to creative industries development. A similar approach can be also adopted in an international setting if we think of the possibility of enhancing small clusters through connections in a corridor-like manner, for example, and an idea that is being currently pioneered in the UK. And finally, I think a regional approach can help overcome many of the challenges that national governments can face in the usual suspects. The access to finance issues that we know affect creative businesses everywhere, the skill gap issue, especially in an increasingly digitalized environment, but also issues related to market concentration and competition. And we have examples again from elsewhere, like the European Union, where initiatives like the digital single market strategy can enhance harmonization rules, increase competition, and offer fairness in terms of rights of producers and consumers at the same time. I think I've passed my 5 minutes mark, and therefore I'll stop here for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, and do stay on the line because you may get some questions shortly. So finally, I'll hand over to John, who you've already been introduced to say a few words on this subject. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mickey. Well, picking up on some of the things that Giorgio has just been saying, one obvious advantage of having a regional approach is scale. You have a market of, 650 million? It makes you, that's the third biggest market in the world, essentially. And for anybody in any kind of business, access to a bigger market presents bigger opportunities. So there's a very simple correlation between size and the benefit of the market to entrepreneurs. But secondly, there are 2 or 3 other issues, in fact. One of them, something that came up this morning, was about demographics. And actually, this region is very interesting because you have some countries that are ASEAN members that are aging, Singapore and Thailand, for example, other countries where there's a burgeoning youth population, Cambodia and Laos. So you have almost uniquely in the world this extraordinary situation, if you look on a regional level, that you're a young population and an aging population. Now, why is that an advantage? If you look at what's happening across East Asia, Korea, Japan, China, these are aging societies. The same issue that we have in Western Europe. It means that our preoccupation is beginning to be pensions and health, all the issues that come with old age. And the average age in Western Europe is now about 40. The median age, I should say, is 40. If you look at Africa, the median age in Africa is 20. The issue that they have is a huge and burgeoning youth population. There are in several cities in Africa now where the average, there are 40% of the population is under 15. It's an extraordinary demographic. And that means the pressure is on them for education and employment opportunities. In the ASEAN region, your median age is 32. You are located precisely halfway between the aging societies and the young societies. That gives you a big advantage because you have a much more varied market, a much more balanced market in terms of the way in which it's going to evolve going forward. So that's something which none of you have on your own as an individual state, but if you're thinking regionally, you have that as a regional entity. And that also is obviously a reflection of scale. And then something else I'd say, one of our experiences in the European Union when we were members, and sadly, of course, the UK is no longer a member, but within the European Union, there were a lot of areas of collaboration, and particularly in the creative sector. So too, there was a media program and a Creative Europe program. Now, the media program encouraged companies in one member state to undertake productions in collaboration with other member states. Now, there was a good deal of criticism and complaint about this program, but it generated some genuinely interesting work. Having a regional structure obliged creative people to think internationally and to collaborate in ways that they might not normally have done. And in the same way, the European Cities of Culture program, when that launched, had a real big impact because while we have national Cities of Culture program, to have a European program meant that there was a promotion at a much bigger regional level of an individual city. It encouraged tourism, it encouraged a sense of regional identity right across Europe. And I think the other thing that comes from having that kind of regional identity is all these initiatives, whether it's festivals, whether it's competitions, whether it's investment funds of one kind or another, encourage the sense of a region having a regional identity. And as ASEAN develops as an overall instrument of creating free trade and lowering barriers within this region, the creative economy has got a particularly potent role to play because it's through these cultural exchanges that people begin to build a sense of a regional identity. So I think the advantages that come are scale, the advantages that you have are that you have this almost unique demography in the world at the moment of a population that is not aging but is not burdened by so many young people. And I think that as you develop the creative and cultural sector, that's got a very, very powerful role in helping to build and cement a greater regional identity. I think so many other points have been made in the last few minutes. That's all that I would add at this stage, Mickey.
Thank you very much, John. So before I open the floor to questions, I just thought I would just ask Karen a question, if that's okay with you, because I thought some of what you said was really interesting. And you were talking a lot about sort of how you can take sort of a local approach into a regional approach and scaling up. And obviously that's the critical challenge here. And I'm interested to know what some of those challenges have been to sort of take something that's actually sort of quite hyper-local originally into something much bigger and sort of more expansive, and what challenges did you meet along the way in order to try to do that we can use as learnings for the development of a cross-ASEAN framework?
Well, I think the first challenge probably is an idea of what you're trying to achieve. I think this tension between cultural preservation and the creative economy. So there is an idea. There is an idea that we should be working domestically. That this is what our focus should be: the preservation of our unique gastronomy and our unique ingredients. But yes, I think most creative practitioners want to increase their market, and they want that connection creatively also with other countries, other cities, other partners. So that would be the first, is actually, and I guess that's more on an institutional level, how you are running your UCCM program. It's an international program, but what are you there to achieve? The others are just, well, for a city like Kuching, which is a small city that I must admit most people have never heard of, something like the UNESCO Creative Cities Network is a great opportunity for us, because bigger cities get those opportunities as a matter of course, whereas we have had to grab onto this network and ride it as far as we possibly can. To be represented in such a local way, but within an international context. And I hope we have started to do that.
Would anyone else like to comment on that question?
I think this issue of local and regional is very, very important for exactly the reasons you mentioned. And again, it's a way of allowing cities and communities to raise their profile and think not just about raising that nationally, but to think about raising it regionally and therefore internationally. And again, in the sector that we're working in, it's this mixture of the super local, you say the particular gastronomy of Kuching, but it's also the old saying that anybody working in the creative industries is working in a global economy. And so this business of being able to combine a sense of local identity with being able to access international markets and to think internationally, I think is very, very important. And one of the issues that we found so often with kind of regional policy in the UK is that people don't have the ambition to think internationally. They quite often don't realize how good they are. I give you just one quick example. With Creative England, we came across two brothers in a little town called Leamington Spa who were they were games developers. They did not realize how good they were. And because we managed to put them on an international stage, we compelled them to go to America. They were picked up by all kinds of big companies in America, and they suddenly realized that they were much better than they realized they had been. And I think this thing of allowing the local to be seen on a bigger platform is something which is good in itself, but very often the people who benefit most are the people who did not realize that what they were doing was something unique and something valuable. And to do that at an international level is always going to be more advantageous than a national level.
Do you mind if I add on a little bit? I believe it was you that was talking about demand-based policies also, and I think this helps. And it's certainly an idea in Sarawak. I'm sorry, I've jumped in ahead of you. Sorry. That sometimes an appreciation is created by international success. And that can really make a difference to the local.
I want to answer that question from the perspective of having a creative city like Kuching and how it actually ended to be a competition among cities. So it actually presented an opportunity for some of our cities because when we were championing Cebu as one of our creative cities, and then we got it. Cebu is now a UNESCO creative city. And then some of our local governments, some of the cities in the Philippines actually followed through because they've seen the success of Cebu. It actually, Cebu is known already, but it elevated somehow because of that creative city branding. And then what followed through is that some of our cities now in the Philippines are actually like, hey DTI, how can I participate that? How can you help us do those things and such? So from that perspective, having that kind of branding, having that kind of initiative as what happened in Kuching, and in our case in Cebu, it actually created a ripple effect on some of the cities because they've seen that opportunity on how to elevate the city, on how they can promote and make the city more sustainable, more creative, and at the same time to be at par with other international cities. Thank you.
Please
to
do,
that.
please do.
I love that point that you've just made. And to pick that up, I think one of the most interesting things about these competitions, City of Culture, UNESCO City, Creative City, whatever, is that very often the people who don't win sort of win anyway because they decide that this is something worth doing. And in the UK, our City of Culture program, very often the cities that have competed for the City of Culture award but don't win decide, well, let's do it anyway, because now we've put in all the planning. So these festivals and competitions, I mean, like the UNESCO Creative City, as you say, can have a really powerful knock-on effect right across the whole region. So thank you for making that point.
Thank you. I'll open to the floor for any questions. Please raise your hands. There's a question at the back there. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitsu. My name is Sopet La. I am from Cambodia, also representing AWEN, which is ASEAN Women Entrepreneur Network. I have two questions because we are talking about creative economic. And first question, I would like to hear, do you have any suggestion regarding to the skill needed for Women Entrepreneur Network in the next 25 years? Because we are talking about 2045 and now next 20 years. And now, if you have any suggestion regarding to the skill needed that the Women Entrepreneur Network should be ready, please highlight. Second one, with regarding to the challenges that women entrepreneur that they would face if they are not ready for that one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who would like to answer that? Yeah.
Thank you for that question. I'll answer first your first question on the plans on women. Just to share, in the next plan of ASEAN, inclusivity, being inclusive is high on its agenda. So definitely the promotion of women, especially women entrepreneurs, is part of the agenda of ASEAN post 2025. So that's one. My second point that I want to raise is that creative economy is universal. So more so with women. Creative economy knows no gender. So that's why when we talk about creative economy, I think I emphasized it in my presentation earlier that creative economy is inclusive because it cuts across sectors, it cuts across boundaries, and when we talk about inclusivity, economic-wise, of course there's still challenges, but we are trying to, come up with policies that makes those initiatives more inclusive and more responsive to the what's being demanded at the current status that we have. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the panel from the floor? Yes. Wait for a microphone to come your way. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm from the ASEAN Secretariat, specifically the Intellectual Property Desk. So I also help to service the ASEAN Working Group on IP. I just had a question about regional policy making. So it's been said that the strength of the creative economy is also in its diversity, but is this diversity in industry coverage also possibly interfering with policy harmonization in ASEAN? As mentioned earlier, there's a wide breadth of industries that it touches, but could this be a hindrance for regional cooperation? To further elaborate, our working group works together with WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and we spent some time 2 years ago traveling throughout ASEAN on a creative economy tour with Felipe Butriago. He's the co-author of a book entitled The Orange Economy, and he advocates for the strict use of quantitative measurement of creative industries. He even mentions the level of detail it goes into is that he even advocates for using the measurement of floor space of museums as one of the measurements, so it's very specific. And him, along with a gentleman from WIPO, they like to use the term copyright industries and dislike the use copyright-related industries because they say that's too wide. So I just wondered what the panel thought about using very strict approaches to defining the creative economy. Would this help to push forward regional collaboration in ASEAN if everybody knows very well who is specifically responsible for what? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. John, shall I pass to you on that?
Thank you, Mickey.
That's okay.
Okay, this is quite a tricky question to answer because WIPO are bound to talk about copyright industries because that's their core activity and they're most interested in it. I think the point is we're talking about regional markets here, and intellectual property valuation and protection is a problem everywhere. And if there is going to be genuine free trade, the kind of collaboration we've been talking about today between entrepreneurs, there has got to be enough of a basis of common policy and common definition across the whole region to make that realistic. It's difficult, it's very difficult, but I think there is no substitute for developing common understandings about a definition which it applies to intellectual property regime that works right across the ASEAN region. That may mean that individual countries and individual industries have their own arrangements around IP, around protection society, collection societies, and so on. But I think without that common understanding, there's a huge impediment to developing a proper regional economy. I don't know if that answers your question, but and I think while the copyright industries are clearly a key part of the creative economy, they do not represent the whole of it. So I think it's important to make that distinction too.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one more question from the room. Anybody else would like to ask our panel a question? Yeah, over here at the front, on the left-hand side. Thank you.
Good afternoon, esteemed panelists. My name is Muhammad Hashim. I am from the Ministry of Human Resource, Malaysia. The panelists was talking about whole of regional approach to advance ASEAN creative economy. So I was actually wondering, are we working towards producing some sort of documented deliverables commonly adopted among ASEAN member states, or are we talking about something else that is not some sort of written deliverables here? Can you enlighten us? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. At least for the symposium, we're working towards a sustainability framework for ASEAN, a creative economy. But on other things aside from the sustainability framework inside ASEAN, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're working on having a more solid and a more founded institutional mechanism that can deal with the sector itself. Because as of now, it's fragmented because there are so many involved working groups that handles with the sector. But to answer in the document, in ASEAN, the way that, again, we establish working groups, we establish how do I say, policy recommendations and such, we always come up with documents. But as to the nature of the document, as to the content of that document, we don't know. So, but at the end of the day, of course, ASEAN will always come up with a document that will establish and solidify that intent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just have one final question actually to ask the panel. You mentioned the phrase, or used the phrase, change the narrative. And I'd like to ask everyone on the panel what they think when they hear that phrase and what they would say in response to that phrase. If the task is to change the narrative, what would you change? Perhaps in one or two sentences, perhaps you've learned over the past few hours this morning and this afternoon so far. So I should start with you, John, and then we'll bring in Giorgio as well if you're still there. Hopefully you still are.
I think changing the narrative in this region, as in many other parts of the world, is really about awareness. And if changing the narrative means governments and investors and other major business organizations have an understanding that the creative economy is not some funny little addition on the side, it's a mainstream part of the global economy going forward, and it informs and enriches many other parts of the economy as well. So that's what changing the narrative would mean to me.
Well, I guess I'll take quite a different approach. I think for me, changing the narrative would be how interconnected we are. That culturally we are actually a lot more similar. We share a lot more similarities than differences, in fact. And this is an exchange over history, and then that leads into this economic and policy block. So yes, it's difference and similarity, I think, are problematic in an ASEAN context because we are so interconnected, from our ingredients and our environment all the way up to our cultures and how they're expressed.
Thank you for that. For me, personally, changing the narrative on how we treat creative economy should be on maximizing its potential. Treating creative economy as a stream of competitiveness, and treating creative economy as a way to achieve our economic goals, our development goals. Because 2 weeks ago, the Philippines hosted the Game Development Summit. So in the Game Development Summit, we hosted studios, gamers, industry players when it comes to game industry development. And one of the topics that was discussed during the Game Development Summit is on how to ensure that our gamers, our industry leaders on game development can, be able to use that gift to them to translate those into sales, to translate those into economic and business opportunities. So for me, that's it. Changing the narrative means that using creative economy is a powerful tool to help everyone elevate their, economic understanding and economic situations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Giorgio is still online and whether or not he has heard that question. We'll give him a chance to answer it. What do I think? Well, I think changing the narrative is around collaboration, actually, but I think we're already doing that. So in a way, that's a very positive thing. So that would be my response. I don't know if Giorgio is still there. He is? Great. If we can see him. Giorgio, hey, you're still here. Thank you so much. I don't know if you heard that last question. Yeah.
Narrative. I'd like to take the cue from some of the questions and reflections from other members of the panel. I think that there are 3 key points for me in terms of changing the narrative. The first one is related to what John was saying, is recognizing the role of the creative economy in terms of diversification, resilience, and innovation. But also leveraging cultural diversity as an asset. When people were mentioning previously about local diversity and preservation of local diversity, I think it is important to remember that in international trade, diversity is the source of comparative advantage, allows product market differentiation, and therefore it is considered a specific factor. Heritage is something unmovable, and therefore is an asset to use and exploit in international markets. So by definition, you shouldn't suppress it, you should preserve it. I think there is a second issue, which is what you were mentioning previously, which is recognition of the importance of regional integration. We live in a world with a lot of global threats. There's strength in unity, and this is important. And the third change in narrative is related to a question from a member of the audience previously, that there are potential trade-offs, and the trade-offs are, for example, regional integration versus preservation of diversity trade-off, but also technological adoption versus environmental preservation. I think these are not real trade-offs in a normative sense, and we need to change the narrative in this sense in order to make the creative economy prosper and make sure that the creative economy can be a service to the well-being of nations, regions, and communities.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, and thank you for joining us once again, and enjoy your breakfast and your day. Thank you so much. Thanks to John, to Karen, and to Jeremiah for your participation in this afternoon's panel. So we will, a quick round of applause. Yes, that'd be very nice. We're going to pause for just a couple of minutes whilst we set up for the next session, so please bear with us. Thank you very much. Hello. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much to our panelists once again. We are going to move into the first of the workshops that we're going to be having this afternoon. We're going to have one workshop session this afternoon, and then tomorrow there will be a series of other workshop sessions. So we're going to be putting you into groups to work collaboratively and together to answer two questions that we'd like you to think about within the next hour or so. I'll first briefly talk about the two areas that we want you to think about within your groups. Then we'll have a little bit of a logistical sort of operation to put you into those groups. So please bear with us a little bit as we do that. And you'll be directed on where to go by our MOTAC team. And also each group will have a facilitator who will look after the discussion as well. So just really briefly, we want you to start to think about two areas. The first is the impact that you think a creative economy sustainability framework can have. And we want you to think about within your group on two of the following four themes. So within your group, you'll be asked to look at two of these four themes. So either the theme of culture, the theme of society, the theme of economics, and the theme of the environment. And we want you to think about the impact that a framework can have, and we want you to write those down on post-it notes that you will have within your groups. Now, what do we mean when we say the word impact? So really what we're thinking about here is what effect would you like the framework to have and on who, and what kind of change would you like to see as a result of the framework being developed. So for example, the framework could impact young people by providing them with skills to develop their creative enterprises and therefore increasing their employment opportunities and economic growth for young people. So the impact on young people is the opportunities to develop their skills and to develop their creative enterprises. So that is the impact that a framework can potentially make to that group of people. So for around half an hour within your groups, we'd like you to write down as many impacts as you can on post-it notes and make a whole list of them. But within your group, please choose two of those themes to work on. And your facilitator will tell you which themes to work on. Just choose two of those four themes. The second thing, once you've done that, is to start to think about a vision statement or a set of vision statements which your table feels summarizes some of the impacts that you have discussed. So a vision statement. So what do we mean by a vision statement? So a vision statement should be around 1 or 2 sentences long. It should be future-facing and inspirational. And it should focus on what the framework could achieve within the next 5 to 10 years. So to give you an example, we've drafted one here just to get you going. So it says, in 10 years, the ASEAN creative economy will have flourished as a beacon of innovation and sustainability, empowering diverse communities, enhancing cultural change, and significantly contributing to economic resilience. So that's just an example of what a vision statement could look like. And within your groups, it would be really helpful for you to start to think about what the vision statement should be for a sustainability creative economy framework. And we would like you to write those draft vision statements on the flip charts that you'll have within your groups as well. Tomorrow, we will be looking at the vision statements and the impacts in a bit more detail. That's why we'd like you to make as many notes as you can, both on the post-it notes for the impacts, but also the vision statements on the flip charts. Hopefully that's broadly clear, but each group will have a facilitator who will explain in more detail if you have any questions. So how are we going to split this up? Each row where you are seated has a letter assigned to it. So if we start at the front, you will be row A, then row B, row C, all the way to row I. So the first row is not going to be in a group, so just to be aware of that. So if you're seated in row B and C, we would like you to stay in this room, and Kemi will look after you and gather you together. And Kemi's at the front here, and she will gather you together to work as a team. If you're seated in row D and E, so that's the 4th or the 5th row, we would like you to go to breakout room number 1, and you'll be shown where to go. It's right down at the other end of the floor. If yours in row F or G, which is row number 6 or 7, please go to breakout room number 2. And if you're in row H or I, so that's 8 and 9, please go to breakout room number 3, and you'll be asked to work together there. Once you've completed both exercises after about an hour, we'll ask all the groups to come back here to the main plenary session, and we'll ask 1 or 2 of the groups to feed back some of the discussion that they've had to the rest of the plenary group so we can hear the types of things that have been discussed. Hopefully that's all clear, but as I say, if you do have any questions or if you get stuck, please ask your facilitator or come and find myself or John, and we will answer your questions. So we look forward to you all having a really fruitful discussion over the next hour or so. Thank you very much.